My family used to live in Roosevelt Public Housings in St. Paul, Minnesota. It was a 3-bedroom unit, and I had a room to myself as my brothers shared a room and my baby sister slept with my parents. I remember one night as I was sleeping, I heard loud thrashing coming from outside my bedroom door. I was awakened and debated if I should get up and check. I was covered in sweat and trembled in fear, but I needed to know who it was that was making such loud noises outside of my room. I slowly got up and tiptoed over to my door. As I slowly reached for the doorknob, the thrashing suddenly stopped. I waited for a few seconds and walked back to my bed. The thrashing continued as I laid back down. I pulled the covers over my head and eventually went back to sleep. The next morning, I questioned my brothers if they were trying to scare me that night, and they both denied, saying that they were asleep the whole time. There were times where I would hear knockings or scratches from the other side of the wall. There are 4 units that are connected, and ours was the second one. If anything, we could hear from Unit 1 and 3. Curious and mischievous as I was, I would knock back. We played this game of knocking back and forth until I got spooked and stopped, but the knockings continued as if it was telling me to knock again. My dad works 3rd shift, so he doesn't stay with us at night. During the hot summer days, my mom and siblings would sleep in the living room with the AC. We only owned 1 AC at the time, so my parents put it in the living room as that is the room that we usually spend time in. My mom would report to my dad that during the night, she would hear the front screen door swinging open and slight knockings on the door. The first few nights, she thought it was probably the wind, so every night before we went to sleep, she made sure to lock the screen door. My mom said that it doesn't happen consecutively. However, some nights, she will experience the same incident. We eventually moved out of there after 2 or 3 years of living there. We moved into this house that was built early around 1910 in East Side, St. Paul. We were the second family that moved into the home. The first people that lived there were just these 2 really old ladies who were already in their 80s or 90s. Supposedly, from what I heard, one of the ladies died, and the other one fell outside on the stairs of the front porch or something and was moved to a senior care home. My mom told us that she used to always have dreams about her shaman guides and the old ladies fighting because that was their home first, and they didn't want us to be living there. Anyways, I was never scared of living in that home, and my mom was a shaman, so I knew if any paranormal things were to happen, I can depend on her. I have never experienced anything before in my entire life, and even until now, I am very thankful for that. But this was just an only occurrence that happened to me. I was in 6th grade. I shared a room in a king-sized bed with my 2 sisters. It was in the middle of the night when I thought I heard my dad saying, "May, open the door." Without hesitation, I woke up immediately and ran downstairs and opened the basement door because I thought my dad got locked down there since he worked 2nd shift and he always came home around midnight and he would shower in the basement before he came to bed. I turned on the kitchen light and stood behind the basement door to see if my dad would come up. And there was nothing. I got so scared, I locked the basement door so fast and ran back upstairs to my room and covered my ears and put a blanket over my head. I was literally sweating under the blanket. Then again, it sounded like it was my mom's voice next. May, open the door." I freaked the hell out and didn't know what to do. All I did was kept on covering my ears, hoping to never hear those voices. It sounded like those Hmong ghost movies where the ghost talks really slow. And again, this time, I swore I heard my mom and my dad both at the same time. I was so scared I didn't know what to do, and for some dumb reason, I never even bothered to wake up both of my sisters. that just kept on covering my ears. I got scared and fell asleep. The next morning when I woke up, I decided not to tell anyone. It wasn't until around a week or so that I decided to tell my mom. All she told me was that it was probably nothing, and that was it. Oh, that was really it? So you just heard voices? Dang. Interested in sharing your stories? Submit them to HmongChronicles@gmail.com or in the description below. Here is the next story. Thank you. This is a story about the house that I am living in. Back in the late 1980s, there was a man who lived in the house and he had a lot of problems. He was very lonely and didn't have much friends. He kept everything to himself, and whatever occurred in the house stayed in the house. So one night, he wrote a letter and placed it on the kitchen table. He then took a rope and went downstairs to the basement and hung himself. The police showed up because the grass hasn't been cut for a very long time. So, when they got in, the house was full of spider webs and things like that. They checked in almost every room but couldn't find the man until they came into the kitchen and saw the letter covered in dust. As they were reading the letter, they heard a thump, thump, thump. There was a noise coming from down the basement. The basement door was just over to the left of the kitchen. As they opened the basement door and went downstairs, they saw the man with a rope around his neck swinging back and forth. His back was facing against them, so they couldn't see his face. The police went around him and discovered the horrifying scene. His eyes were bloodied and his long tongue was sticking out. Another thing about this house was that a cousin of mine used to live here, and his son was shot to death because he was in a rival gang. They had to move out after that incident. It wasn't until 1999 that my family moved in and had been living there ever since. Oh, what the heck? How can you live in a house that's so tragic like that? This happened to me during the end of summer in 2005. I have to say that I have never been sat on or had ever experienced anything like this before. I was visiting a friend in Minnesota, and one morning I had dropped her off at work and came back home because I was going to go somewhere and needed her car. I came back to her apartment and got myself ready and left. I didn't return home until it was almost noon or a little after that. I was tired, so I figured that I'd lay on the couch and take a nap before I go and pick up my friend from work. Her apartment was on the second floor, if I can remember correctly. I had the sliding door to the balcony open. The traffic on the highway was obviously loud, and I could feel the light wind as it came into the apartment through the opened sliding door. I was laying down on the couch with my feet towards the sliding door. While I was slowly dozing off, I could hear the traffic and two little laughters. It sounded like they were playing outside. All of a sudden, I could not move. I tried to open my eyes, but they did not want to open. All the while, I can still hear the girls talking and laughing from what sounded like below me on the first floor. I tried to move my arm, but to no avail. I tried to scream in hopes that the scream will break me free of whatever it was. The attempt to scream did no good either. After all attempts failed, I thought to myself that I would give one last try by moving my arms. I gave it all my might, and with a hard jerk, my left arm finally moved. Once it moved, my body was back to normal. I stood up and asked myself what happened. It was strange because all the while this was happening, I was fully aware of the sounds from the two girls and the traffic. I mean, I could hear it clearly, and it didn't feel like I had fallen asleep. I didn't tell my friend until after I came back home because she lived alone and I didn't want to scare her. After I told her, she started sensing that someone was always watching her. Whenever she is in her room, it seemed like someone was watching her from the living room and vice versa. In 2005, my widowed aunt, whose husband passed away a year before, and her 3 kids left their home in Thailand to settle in the US. One very late night, my aunt found her youngest son, who was 3 at the time, watching TV. When she asked him to turn it off and go to bed, he replied, "But Daddy still wants to watch TV with me." That gave my aunt the chills. Scared, she called my mom and asked my mom to come and sleep over that night. When my mom arrived, she asked the son why he wasn't sleeping, and he gave her the same response. His dad was still wanting to watch the TV with him. Angry at her son, my aunt started yelling at him and asked him to stop lying and go to bed. Suddenly, the lights went out. Both my aunt and my mom became very frightened, and they asked the son why he turned off the lights. He said, "That wasn't me, it was Daddy. You guys kept on yelling at me, so he turned off the lights." My aunt told her son to, "Tell Daddy to turn on the lights, we won't yell at you anymore." Her son started giggling hysterically and asked his dad to turn on the lights, and it turned back on. Fast forward a couple of days, my mom asked my aunt if there was anything that had belonged to her late husband, which may have caused him to follow her to America. She replied, "Yes, on the day of his funeral, I loved him and missed him a lot. So, while sitting by his deathbed, I gently caressed his arm and some of his dead skin came off. The elders told me to keep it for good luck." Oh, that's crazy, what the hell? My aunt ended up throwing the dead skin of her late husband away, and they moved out of that apartment soon after. There hadn't been anything scary going on since, and her son doesn't remember the night his father came to watch the TV with him. Guys, don't keep the dead skin of your loved ones, okay? One of my friends told me that when he was a small kid, they visited his uncle, who was his mom's brother. His uncle was a shaman and had an altar down in the basement. Well, the reason why they visited this uncle was because he had been sick for a while. One night, my friend could not fall asleep, so he went to grab some water in the kitchen, but heard crying and yelling coming from down in the basement. He thought it was just one of his cousins staying up late to play downstairs. He decided to investigate and see what was really down there. When he went down the stairs, he saw an old, shriveled woman and 2 small boys next to the altar. They looked like they were scratching and eating some of the food that were placed on the altar. He had never seen them before, so he thought that they were other relatives that came there to visit his sick uncle. My friend asked them if they needed anything, but they just kept on ignoring him, so he decided to go upstairs and go to sleep. He didn't think much of it until the next day when his mother told him that she had a dream about her dead mother and younger brothers who were crying for food. He told his story to his mother and about what he saw in the basement, and she got very frightened. They both went down to check on the food and the altar, and there were little scratches and bite marks all over them. It is common knowledge that people should not touch a shaman's altar aside from the shaman. Even though the uncle was sick, his mom went and let the uncle know about her dream and what my friend saw. The uncle became really sad and said that due to his sickness, he wasn't able to perform his duties as a shaman, and the spirits were unpleased with it. Okay, I heard this story from a college buddy, and it still gives me the shivers. One night, my buddy was at his uncle's house playing cards when this happened to one of the 3 uncles there. Him and 2 of his uncles were playing cards in the living room while the other uncle decided to call it early and went to bed. The bedroom was connected to the living room, and the uncle who went to sleep didn't close the door because he still wanted to talk with the rest of them. After a while, the uncle that went to bed felt something crawling onto the bed. He felt the pressure of someone slowly moving from his feet up to his chest. He knew that there were no kids in the house, and all the others were still playing cards from the sound of their conversation. He pretended to fall asleep, but when the pressure of whatever it was on his bed reached his chest, he suddenly leapt up and threw his blanket over it. My friend heard his uncle yelling, "Hurry up! I caught something on my bed! Help! Help me!" They all dropped their cards and ran in for a look. Two of them went in and started pulling on the other corners of the blanket. My friend, being younger and less experienced than his uncles, could not move from the doorway because he was so scared. This is what he saw that scared him so much. The blanket was covering something, and it was moving underneath it, trying to escape. Whatever it was desperate. My buddy said that he heard the thing under the blanket screaming and yelling. It sounded like a girl, and the voice was a high-pitched, haunting voice. My buddy could not move an inch, even though his uncles were telling him to grab one corner of the blanket. He froze, and all he could focus on was the shape moving under the blanket. After a while, his uncles couldn't hold onto the blanket any longer, and my buddy saw something dash out from under the blanket and go right under the bed. He said that it looked like a human, but it was discolored. It had a greenish-blue hue to its skin. My uncles lifted the bed but could not find anything. After a while, when things calmed down, the uncle who was sleeping finally told them what he think it was. He said that back in Laos, he had a girlfriend who loved him very much. They promised to always be together, and it seemed like she was keeping her end of the bargain. It turned out that my buddy was the only one who didn't know about this, but the other two uncles experienced things like this before. Talk about a wild poker game. Around 3 months ago, my father went hunting for squirrels with some cousins. Last year, they found a hunting spot where there were plenty of squirrels. However, they noticed that there was no one hunting in this area. They thought that maybe it was just their luck, so this year they went back to the same place. This time, however, strange things began to happen. My father would shoot a squirrel and everyone would see the squirrel fall down, but when they went to the spot where the squirrel should have fallen down, there was nothing there. At nighttime, they would count 4 dead squirrels and wake up in the morning to see 5 or 6 squirrels instead. A little freaked out, but not enough, they decided to stay for another night. This time, my father shot a squirrel, and when they went to pick it up, there were 2 squirrels instead of 1. This was the last straw, so my father and my cousins decided to come home. I don't believe they ever went back to that spot. Anyways, the strangeness did not stop there. When my father brought home the squirrels, my mom would skin it and clean everything out. She'd place them in plastic bags and set them in the freezer. Weeks later, when she wanted to prepare a meal with the squirrels, she would unravel the squirrel, and to her horror, half of the squirrel was gone. My mom said that it was almost as if someone or something had torn and eaten half of the squirrel. She then checked the other squirrels, and they too were in that condition. There's no explanation to why this occurred. No one had eaten the squirrel, and it's only us kids in the house, and we don't eat that stuff. We decided to oneng for my dad. The shaman said that my dad did not call out to our great-grandfather and other ancestors when he and the cousins went out hunting. Because he did not invite the ancestors to feast with him, the spirits got angry and decided to come and eat half of the squirrels in our freezer. Interesting, huh? The shaman said that before my father eats or goes hunting, he must call out our great-grandfather and the other ancestors to come and eat. Now, whenever my dad goes out to hunt, he always calls out for my great-grandfather and our other ancestors.